Hello friends, it is indeed my pleasure to welcome all of you to our discussion on a very important topic under the discipline of comparative government and politics, that is the political system of China. This topic is particularly important primarily due to the fact that China in the present international relations scenario has emerged as a very important strategic power, primarily due to its military nuclear power, but at the same time it also maintains its socialist perspective and orientation by following the principles of Marxism, Leninism and Maoism, although with great transformation. An analysis of the political institutions of the Chinese constitutional system is very vital, primarily because in present-day Asia, the position that China has been occupying over the years, primarily due to the nuclear power and also because of its economic advancement and also because of the presence of communist regimes and its tradition of people's democracy and China's revolution. The Constitution of China, as Weir rightly states, that the Constitution which emerged after the Second World War was more of a manifesto rather than a constitution. The uniqueness of China lies in the fact that although the constitutional principles of China is based on Marxism, Leninism and Maoism, China followed a path which is very different from the erstwhile Soviet Union, since it was clear with its emphasis upon the building of socialist society and abolish all forms of exploitation. The Constitution of China, in fact, has a great constitutional history of growth, and it is the present Constitution of 1982 which can be said, according to Peng Zhen, a constitutional expert on China, that it is the 1982 Constitution which sums up the historical experiences of China's socialist development to the best possible extent and reflects the interests of all the nationalities in the country. It came into force through subsequent amendments in 1954, 1978, and finally it was adopted on 4th of December 1982. A basic focus and a review of the features of the 1982 Constitution shows that firstly it is a written constitution comprising 138 articles, and we find that in contrast to the Constitution of 1978, it is more elaborate, and also in contrast to the 1954 Constitution, although which had an elaborate preamble, but with only 116 articles, so to say. The present constitution, like the earlier constitutions, is flexible in nature. It is a unitary, multinational state and not a federation of federation like that of the former Soviet Union. According to the Constitution, China is a unitary, multinational state built up jointly, for that matter, by the people of all nationalities. A strong central government has been established with very little power to the provinces. China remains, in fact, a Unitarian state. The principle of equality among all nationalities is a very important ideal and political principle which is followed, although according to Article 4, which believes in equality of all nationalities, in practice it is found that there is definite violation of this article in reality. The National People's Congress is the exclusive legislative authority in China, and according to the Constitution, all power belongs to the people. It is exercised through the National People's Congress and the local People's Congresses elected by the people at different levels. The Chinese aim to modernize the state in the new millennium, which marks a shift and a transformation and a transition from strictly following the principles of socialism in an orthodox way to further democratization and greater openness under the 1982 Constitution. Another feature of the 1982 Constitution is that the People's Republic of China can neither be said to be parliamentary nor a presidential type. The Republic is headed by a president who is in reality a nominal head and who actually performs in reality only ceremonial functions. The real executive authority is supposed to be the State Council, which is headed by the Prime Minister. The State Council, in fact, according to the Constitution, is responsible to the National People's Congress, which is the unicameral legislative body and also an elected body. The Chinese polity, in fact, under the 1982 Constitution, reflects a democratic character, since the Prime Minister cannot hold office for more than 2 terms consequently. On the other hand, we find that despite reflecting a democratic character, dictatorship is reflected also by the fact that we find that the State Council primarily functions under the leadership of the Communist Party of China. The preamble of the 1982 Constitution states that under the leadership of the Communist Party and under the guidance of Marxist, Leninist and Maoist principles, all nationalities principally adhere to the people's democratic dictatorship, which is a very vital principle and a guiding feature of the 1982 Chinese Constitution, following the earlier constitutions of 78 and 1954. Democratic centralism is another important feature of the 1982 Constitution, and in this context it can be said that the principle was adopted by the Communist Party in 1949 and has been reflected in subsequent constitutions in 1954, in 1978 and even in 1982. The National People's Congress and other organs in fact practice democratic centralism, which primarily means the combination of democratic participation and accountability at all levels of government and centralized policy making and implementation of the central organs or controlled by the central organs or according to the dictates of the higher authorities of the Communist Party. It is due to this principle that one can say that China has enabled itself to emerge as a predominant power in Asia and even as a global power. Chapter 2, embodying Articles 33 to 51, says that there are some fundamental rights which are guaranteed to the citizens, and Articles 52 to 56 incorporates certain fundamental duties under the 1982 Constitution to the citizens of China. However, enjoyment of the rights in a socialist state can be said to be a political untruth, primarily because Article 51 of the Chinese Constitution of 1982 clearly states that enjoyment of the rights should never infringe upon the welfare of the state or the interests of society at large. The Constitution is also based on the principles of Marxism, Leninism and Maoism, and also follows the dictates of Engels as already been mentioned, and Article 1 in this context declares China as a state under the people's democratic dictatorship, which is primarily led by the working class. The constitutional structure of China if we focus on it, we find that it is made up of the National People's Congress, which we have already mentioned is a unicameral legislative body, and the exclusive legislative body, the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress, the President, who forms the executive organ, who actually in reality is a ceremonial head of the State Council, the cabinet with the premier as its head, and a judicial system comprising of the Supreme People's Court and the Supreme People's Procuratorate. A focus on the legislative organ of the Chinese government under the 1982 Constitution clearly states that China has opted for a unicameral legislature, which is the National People's Congress, and in this context special mention needs to be mentioned of Article 58 of the 1982 Constitution, according to which the National People's Congress and its standing committee exercises the legislative power of the state. The NPC, or the National People's Congress, in fact, is the sole legislative, exclusive legislative body and lawmaking body for the country. The NPC, in fact, along with making laws, has the power to control economic and social planning in China, and also the power to approve the budget, elect the Prime Minister, the President, the Vice President of China, the President of the Supreme Court, and Procurator General of the Supreme People's Procuratorate. Though, however, the reality lies that though its powers are impressive and worth mentioning, it is in reality a ceremonial and a formal body which actually functions under the control and guidance of the Communist Party of China. According to the Constitution, in fact, the NPC, according to Article 57, is the highest organ of state power. It is the exclusive legislative body of China. The Constitution, however, is silent about the composition of the Congress and the mode of election of its members. However, we find that it continues to remain in power, or it is elected for a period of 5 years. The President, however, has not been empowered to either prorogue, summon the sessions of the NPC in any way. The NPC is not the sole legislative body, in fact, but the uppermost layer of a nationwide system of people's congresses at different levels of the government in the NPC. Article 64, in fact, empowers the National People's Congress to amend the Constitution by a 2/3 majority of the deputies of the National People's Congress. The NPC, in fact, like the earlier constitutions, has made a provision for a standing committee, which is a continuously functioning legislature. The Constitution unfortunately does not mention the composition of the standing committee, and we find that the NPC possesses various functions, among which being the highest legislative authority is the most important one. Unfortunately, the significance of the standing committee is very important because the NPC meets only once a year, and hence most of the functions of the NPC, or the National People's Congress, is actually performed by the standing committee. The authority of the Communist Party is also all-pervasive, and it is the party and not the standing committee or the NPC which is the center of power in China. Thus, the NPC and the standing committee actually, like the president, plays a formal and a ceremonial role in reality. The standing committee of the NPC, in fact, is said to be a miniature of the National People's Congress. It is made up of the chairman, the vice chairman, secretary general, and the members. The NPC, in fact, decides on the membership of the standing committee. Its tenure is similar to the NPC. It performs legislative, electoral, executive, and judicial special powers. The position of the Standing Committee, in fact, seems to be very impressive, primarily because accountability to the National People's Congress becomes meaningless due to its infrequent meetings, and which makes the Standing Committee with its compact size more important than the NPC. Despite enormous powers, however, we have already said that primarily and ultimately it is the Communist Party which exercises an all-pervasive influence, and it gives a setback to the position and the role of the organs of state power in China to a great extent. The President of China, in fact, is the highest ceremonial functionary of the state, and although the Constitution of 1982 created the post of the President, but the President is not an executive and an all-powerful President like that of United States of America. The President, in fact, is elected by the NPC. An analysis of the functions of the President of China reveals thus that he is primarily a glamorous head of the state, and we find that the State Council, apart from the President, forms an important part of the executive organ, is the highest organ of state administration, a sort of cabinet of central government which is responsible to the National People's Congress. According to Article 85 of the 1982 Constitution, the State Council, in fact, is the People's Central Government, and Article 86 tells us about the composition of the State Council, which is made up of the Premier, Vice Premier, the State Councillors, the Ministers in charge of commissions, the Auditor General, and the Secretary General. The State Council too enjoys a tenure of 5 years similar to the NPC, and the members of the State Council can be removed by the members of the NPC while not in session by the Standing Committee. The State Council, in fact, is entrusted with a lot of functions similar to the functions performed by the governments or the Council of Ministers in other countries, like running the administration of the country, formulating policies, looking into the implementation of policies, as well as formulating proposals for legislation. It also takes policy decisions on certain important matters. The Premier is the head of the State Council, and although the Premier enjoys an important position, he is not as powerful, or his position is not comparable to that of the British Prime Minister or the Prime Minister of India in any way. In this context, however, it needs to be mentioned that the personality of the Premier is an important deciding factor regarding the area and the capability and the ability to spread influence, because important personalities, in fact, in Chinese history, have held the post of the Premier, like Zhou Enlai, Hua Guofeng, and others. However, the position of the Premier cannot be compared to the real executive heads in many other countries, most importantly with Britain. The judiciary, in fact, plays a very different role in a socialist state in contrast to a liberal democratic state. It is not an independent branch of the government as it is in a liberal democratic state, but its basic power is to protect socialist legality and strengthen the socialist system as an organ of government. The Communist Party, in fact, in China is supposed to be the vanguard of the people. Judiciary is supposed to be only a part of state power, and its basic responsibility is to work more as an instrument of the Communist Party, for that matter, and protect, for that matter, the social, legal, laws of the country. The structure of judiciary in China is very simple and pyramidal. The local people's court constitute the base and the Supreme People's Court constitute the apex. The powers of the court, unfortunately, however, are not defined by the constitution. In this context, it can be said that its claim to be independent is a mere exaggeration, unlike the courts in USA. The judges are removed by the legislature. Unfortunately, the courts are not equipped with the power of judicial review, and unfortunately, in no way do they enjoy the power of advisory jurisdiction too. China also has a system of maintaining a pattern of people's procuratorates. The local people's procuratorates exist at different levels. Besides the procuratorates, there are special courts like the military courts, and at the apex is the Supreme People's Procuratorates with the procurator as the head. China, in fact, unlike the US judiciary, has a single integrated judicial pattern. It also has an elected judiciary. The judiciary is not empowered, however, unlike the US Constitution, to review the acts of the Congress or the orders of the executive and in any way enjoy the power to declare them as unconstitutional. The judiciary, in fact, does not enjoy an independent position but remains a committed type and instrument of state power to fulfill the policies of state power and educate people regarding socialist legality on the one hand and socialist system on the other. It is more like a government department, unfortunately, meant to implement the policies of the party in a very significant way. It is neither the protector of the rights of the people nor the defender of the Constitution or the guardian and interpreter of the laws of the Constitution. It is the Communist Party and not the judiciary, for that matter, which actually implements policies and takes the decisions with regards to the socialist legal system in China. It primarily acts as an instrument of the government to carry out the dictates of the party. In this context, Barnett rightly mentions that the very purpose of the judicial organ in China has been defeated to a large extent, primarily because it is such a weak institution and the party remains actually the source of all decision making and also the source of all political authority. Several structures in this context needs to be mentioned that in several governmental structures, changes, shifts, transformations have been brought about within the party apex bodies in the post-Cold War era and primarily in the post-Mao period, primarily because China's desire to open dialogues with other countries of the world and not stay in isolation and emerge as one of the global powers and strategically the most important power in Asia. This was evident in the 14th Congress of the Communist Party of October 12, 1992. The new policy was in fact just a culmination of the reforms era. Jiang Zemin in fact said that the only way to liberate China was to modernize her. He said that many of the ideological and structural shackles have been shaken off. In fact, in the post-Cold War era, communism got loosened and began relaxation of its dictatorial tendencies. The communists got involved, in fact, in China in adopting a more liberal ideology, and in the new change scenario, the uniqueness of Chinese constitution and Chinese foreign policy remains that China has opened its doors for dialogues with other countries and has come closer to Russia. Presently, in fact, this is one of the factors for which China has emerged as one of the great powers in the global scenario. In this context, one can conclude that the Chinese constitution, in fact, fact, continues to uphold the principles of Marxism, Leninism, and Maoism, the basic principles guiding Chinese governmental institutions and political ideals, but definitely the post-Mao period and the post-Cold War period reflects certain basic modifications. The institutional framework in the post-Cold War period seems to have been streamlined to a large extent, and the concepts of decentralization, liberalization of the economy and incorporation of the private sectors have become a vital part of China, which has led to modernization of China in the new international relations environment. An analysis, in fact, of the Chinese political system reveals that the inner workings of China's government seems to be shrouded in secrecy on many occasions, and formal institutions tend to mask the dynamics of political power. In fact, this is the most important question facing the Chinese political authorities and officials at the present juncture, that the diffusion of political power between the party and the government on many accounts, and also the NPC and the PLA on the other, often make it difficult and also build up and create a complex proposition to decide actually who enjoys and has the authority to set or implement policies for China in the future. Thank you.